Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Traffic Safety Hotdish. Today, our topic is 6 states reveal the recent recreational vehicle safety campaigns featuring ATV, UTV, boating, and snowmobiling. My name is Veronica Hamann, and I am today's moderator. I am the Regional Executive Director of the Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota region for Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Our purpose at MAD is to end drunk driving, help fight drug driving, support the victims of these violent crimes, and prevent underage drinking. And that is because we believe in a world where everyone is safe to live, work, and play. I would like to start out by thanking our host, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the Minnesota Department of Health, the Minnesota Department of Public Safety, and the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Before we start, we want to make sure you know that this webinar is being recorded and all attendees are muted. You will be able to find several useful items on the Minnesota TZD website after today's webinar, including relevant documents our speakers will be referencing today, and the PDH form for continuing education credits, and a recording of today's webinar. Video and audio for all participants is turned off, but you can communicate with the speakers or other participants using the chat and Q&A boxes at the bottom of your screen. Please use the chat feature to introduce yourself, share ideas with all participants, or to let us know if you're having any AV or IT issues. You can use the Q&A feature if you have a question for our speakers, and I'll keep an eye on that. If it's a relevant and easy to answer question in the moment, I may share it with the speakers during their presentation. Otherwise, we should have plenty of time for questions after our speakers are done. All right. Let me introduce our panelists in alphabetical order. And their full bios are on the TZD webinar webpage that is dropped in the chat. First, we have Lisa Dugan. She is the Recreation Safety Outreach Coordinator for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. Next, we have Cody Gray listed on the PowerPoint. He's unable to make it today, but we have Hunter Nikolai. He is with Illinois Department of Natural Resources. Nick Harrington was also unable to join us today, but the South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks was a part of our campaign. Next, we have Tony Hillig. He is the Recreation Division Chief for North Dakota Parks and Recreation Department. And Jake Holsclaw, Off-Highway Vehicle Administrator for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And we have Erin Payton. She is the Regional Executive Director for Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin for Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And we have Susan Stocker, the Voting Law Administrator, Education Coordinator for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. All right, welcome everyone. So next, to kick us off, I would like to invite Erin Payton, MAD Regional Executive Director, to introduce our multi-state campaign. Erin.
Thank you, Veronica. I am going to share my screen. Well, this all started about a year and a half ago. I had just started at MAD in 2022, and I got an email from a guy named Jake in Wisconsin. He happens to be in this meeting today, and he asked if MAD was doing anything about recreation vehicle safety, and I said, I don't know. So we started looking into it and talking, and then we brought Veronica on board. I said, Veronica, you want to do this with me? And she said, yes. And so by the end of it, we had, at the beginning, there were 5 states. There are now 6 states involved. We started with ATVs and boating, and we've added snowmobile safety. Let me see if I can get there we go. So now we have, sorry, this is a little blurry, but we've got pretty much everyone who's been welcomed on this this call, and it's really exciting to see it because again, it's amazing what one conversation can turn into. And now we've got 6 states participating, many organizations participating. So what is it? We started in May of 2023 with our boating and ATV campaign. We created, through a lot of collaboration, a rack card that we printed out 5,000 copies and put them throughout, basically the whole Midwest on tips to be safe on your ATV and boating. And the great thing about it is, even though Mothers Against Drunk Driving, our big focus is impaired driving, we included all sorts of different safety tips to be safe on boats and ATVs, with the biggest focus, of course, being sober when you are riding those. We want to make sure everybody thinks of them as the same thing as driving a car, is being sober is the safer choice. So we press releases, rack cards. We did media events. This is Veronica's team in Minnesota, doing Operation Dry Water with the DNR, and it was a really big success. So we pushed forward and had some press. And then this January, we did a snowmobile safety campaign. Again, we did rack cards that we printed out and distributed throughout the regions, did press releases. So these were obviously focused on snowmobiles. And again, not just the impairment issue, but just all sorts of different safety facts that people are really thinking when they're hitting the trails about the ways to have really a lot of fun, but also be safe. And these are some fun pictures. Susan and some of the MAD team got together at the Lake Okoboji Winter Games in January in Iowa, representing, and it's just a great illustration of the partnership that we have achieved together, and how proud we are of what we're doing. We're starting all over again with boating and ATV for this spring and summer. And we're just going to keep growing this program because the message is so important to get out there, that regardless of if you're in a car, you're on a boat, you're on an ATV or snowmobile, being safe keeps you safe and everyone around you safe. And that is it.
All right, let's move right into our questions. So our first question I'm going to ask our group of panelists is, tell us about an ATV, UTV, boating, or snowmobiling crash that stands out to you. And how does this crash remind you why your work is so important? We'll start with Hunter, and then Jake, and then Tony.
Absolutely. In a past life, I was actually a water patrol officer for Iowa under Susan for a summer in a temporary position. And we saw a few boating accidents that summer at Lake Manawa, which is on the western side of Iowa along the Missouri River. And I was out on boat patrol one day, and we received a call from dispatch that there was a boat accident on that lake in what they call Party Cove, as I'm sure many of you know, on various lakes across the Midwest, what they call Party Cove. Basically a big congregation of people on boats and personal watercrafts, drinking and partying and having a good time. But a father had went to move and adjust his boat within the parking of that cove, and instead of moving forward, mistakenly went backwards and struck his daughter with the prop. So that was one, especially now that I have kids, that really has stuck with me throughout my safety education career, now moving forward to that it can happen to anybody of any experience in any situation. And that I think education is an important facet of helping reduce that. So that's one that stuck with me.
Thank you for sharing that. Jake.
Yeah, so just a quick background. Prior to my current position with Wisconsin DNR, I worked as a rec deputy for a sheriff's department in central Wisconsin. So doing that for a number of years, and then working as a recreation warden for the Wisconsin DNR, I was exposed to a variety of crashes. And one that just sticks out in particular was several years ago. There was a fatal UTV crash that happened in central Wisconsin, and every one of these crashes is a little bit different, but they all have some very similar factors to those. I think a big part of these crashes is it's just the poor decisions are being made. If they're highly intoxicated, which was this case, the male operator was highly intoxicated, and he killed his fiance in the crash. So, you know, they're both very young people. It's just a very tragic situation when you see a crash like that that could have very easily been prevented with smart choices and wise decision making. They basically broke every rule that they could break. He was operating while intoxicated, and driving too fast. Seatbelts weren't worn, helmets weren't worn. So, you know, just a lot of issues there. And so when I look at that and any of the other multiple crashes that I've investigated, whether they're fatalities or injury crashes, that's why I think this work is important. That's we really do change lives by getting proper safety messaging out there and good enforcement out there to keep people safe.
Tony.
Good morning. About 2 years ago on the east side of our state, there was two young girls, 13 and 14, that had taken their father's UTV, and they were driving in the highway right-of-way access in the ditches, approached one of the approaches at a too high of a rate of speed. They were wearing their safety harnesses. The ATV bucked, and what they had failed to do is clear the cargo that was in the back of that UTV. So unfortunately, one of the pieces of cargo struck one of the girls in the head, causing a fatality, just from that simple bucking of that. And I think my lesson really from that is that the helmets, save lives even in the UTVs. Just because you're wearing your safety harnesses doesn't mean that you're going to be safe.
And Susan.
Yeah, so early in my career for boating incidents, there was a grandfather, and I'm sure this person had been boating all his life, and he was towing his granddaughter on an inner tube, and unfortunately traveling too close to shore. And so as the boat turned to open water, they failed to realize the length of the tow rope, which was of course between 50 and 75 feet. And so when they turned, the rope swing basically launched his granddaughter on the tube toward shore, and unfortunately found and connected with a small log that impaled her side. It didn't end in a fatality, but of course, as we can imagine, the unfortunate, challenges for surgeries and what have you to go through. But what, and it stuck with me, as we continue with the popularity of tubing and towed water sports, the fact that people realizing that those the swing and the speed of a tube or whatever is potentially could be over 50 miles per hour as you're going side to side, and that's very, very important, something that we keep sharing the message of today.
Absolutely. And keeping this in mind, I want to zoom out a little bit and ask the group if they can share a few statistics from their states regarding recreation vehicle safety. What are some of the common contributing factors regarding crashes in your state? Tony.
So what we kind of see, we started tracking specific OHV and snowmobile statistics in around 2020, and those are accidents or incidents that had law enforcement response to those. So the majority of the accidents that we've seen are single vehicle rollovers, and those are caused primarily from excessive speed when they're doing those. So excessive speed, unfamiliar with the vehicle, or in the case of some of our youth who operate in a vehicle that is not manufacturer recommended for their age. We see a lot of our side-by-side injuries from the lack of wearing the safety restraints or improper taking off the rollover protection systems to service some type of implement that they're using in a rural farming community. And all of our fatalities, almost to a T, were from a lack of helmets.
And Jake.
Yeah, it's amazing how similar our statistics are in Wisconsin. We do try to keep some pretty good records, specifically in Wisconsin. It's required that any kind of crash that results in an injury resulting in where a physician has to treat that injury. So essentially a run to the hospital. Those are all reportable crashes, and that goes for, our boating, our snowmobile, our ATV side. But yeah, we're seeing the same things: speed, inexperience, lack of helmet use, lack of seatbelt use in UTVs. One thing to note on the UTVs is, they are very safe machines if you wear a helmet and you wear a seatbelt at the same time, because we found that a number of our injuries, if people are maybe wearing a helmet, but if they're not wearing a seatbelt, they can get basically tossed free of that machine in a rollover or some other incident. And then that roll bar actually acts as something that causes them more injury. So just something to remember with that. And then we do see that the majority of our crashes also, as in over 50%, alcohol is involved, at least in our fatal crashes. So that's a pretty high number, and that's definitely a concern for us.
And Susan?
Yeah, so for boating while intoxicated on a national level, approximately 16% of the fatalities that known to have alcohol as a contributing factor. And unfortunately, Iowa has consistently been higher than that. In 2022, we found 25% contributed as alcohol as a primary contributing factor. And then unfortunately in 2023, just last year, 43% of our fatalities involved alcohol as a contributing factor.
Hey, Veronica, I just want to add, at this point with BUI is actually where MAD first started with recreation vehicle safety, and this was in 2022. And to Susan's point, our centered around it was at the time our national president, Alex Adi. She has now been hired at MAD. She's one of Veronica and my peers as a regional executive director. When she was 12 years old, she was on a jet ski with her family, and an impaired boater was impaired and not able to properly navigate his boat, and he landed on top of her, and she had some pretty traumatic injuries. She survived, obviously, but I think one of the things we talk about the BUI is that when you're on the water, it actually exacerbates the alcohol. It heightens it even more than if you're driving a car. And I think that can't be overstated. So I'm glad Susan brought that up.
Hunter.
Yeah, I want to touch on, in Illinois, anybody that's over 11 and older can complete our snowmobile and boating course entirely online. And one of the trends or statistics we've seen, at least in the past few years, is that our students are completing the course kind of seasonally right before they intend to participate. So in an instance of the snowmobiles were open for about 9 days in Northern Illinois this year, they took the course online right before that. Same thing with boating. You see people waiting until the last minute before they probably intend to participate. So something just to consider and think about. And then, from a perspective of common contributing factors in the boating realm in Illinois, careless and reckless operation, operator inattention are two of the top contributing factors. And then in our most recent stat year, which is 22 yet, 83% of our boating fatalities, operator was failed to wear a life jacket or personal flotation device. So that's some common things we see here in Illinois.
And Lisa.
So I can just, the contributing factors from our state are very similar to what the other states have mentioned too. I wanted to touch on a little bit on youth statistics in Minnesota that we're seeing with the ATV incidents, that it's not just, young operators, but really young operators that are operating on machines that are much too big for them. They don't have the experience, and potentially, I think PWCs fall into this category as well, that they may be looked at as kind of a toy for the kids, something that the parents can hand the keys off to the kids without proper education, and for them to go out and have fun on. And that's been one of our focuses, has really been messaging to the parents and to kids that they're not necessarily toys. They're fun to go out on, but they're machines, and they need to have education. They need to be properly fitting on the ATVs that they're going to be out riding to prevent some of those really young tragic fatalities.
Our next question is, what are you doing in your state to raise awareness regarding recreation vehicle safety? Tony.
Yeah, so a couple different things that we're starting to see some success with, and I would tell you the first is partnerships. So that outreach and engagement into those local communities through our partners, and two categories here in North Dakota that have been very lucrative in advancing our youth, specifically OHV and snowmobile education. One is law enforcement. So partnering with some of our county sheriff's departments to bring those courses into their communities, have that law enforcement presence, but also do a youth hands-on OHV safety course has just been huge for that. And then our farming groups, whether it's 4-H or in North Dakota we have a farm safety for kids. Those different types of things, and then again bring in some of those educational opportunities into those local communities to advance that education. One thing that we do here, different things, so we can do some static type of things too, where we go into some of the local schools and do some static type of stuff and enhance some of that safety education. But it's really talking about one of the things that we've seen that really sticks with the kids is some helmet demonstrations. We have a couple helmets we have cut in half to really explain how those helmets actually protect you and demonstrate that. And then we do a helmet drop. And so we take cantaloupes and we put a cantaloupe in a helmet and strap it in and drop it and show them that the cantaloupe stays intact. And then we'll drop a cantaloupe without a helmet from the exact same distance and watch the cantaloupe kind of implode upon impact. And that's one of those lessons that I think kind of resonates with the youth here. So.
Thank you. Lisa.
So I just wanted to go over a campaign that we had launched in 2021. The intent is a 5-year campaign, so it can start to become familiar within the state. And it was called Safety is Always in Season, is the kind of umbrella name of that campaign. And that was aimed to promote safety across all of the various recreational activities that we have here. So boating and water safety, ice safety, ATV and snowmobile safety, all of the seasons that people are out enjoying, everything that they can do in the outdoors. And within that campaign, we designed 2 distinct groups that we were kind of catering our messaging to. The first one was called Family Fun, or kind of like your weekend warrior type groups. And then the other one was more of the enthusiast group, which would be a more seasoned, maybe kind of set in their way type of recreator. For the seasoned ATV riders or seasoned boaters, The campaign was focused maybe on their more relaxed or confident approach to riding or boating, stemming from experience on the water, experience on the trails, and their familiarity with whichever, machine that it is that they're operating. So maybe these riders are going to be, more adventurous and willing to try new destinations. They're traveling more with their boats or ATVs. They may prioritize safety. They may understand the risks more, know where to take a safety class, know where to go for regulations. And with this group, it was very specific to they may be aware of the risks and that may be present in whichever activity they're doing, but they may be more set in their ways and unwilling to change, how they're already doing it because they've done it forever. They've been boating forever, so they don't put their life jackets on. They've been ATV for a really long time, so they don't wear their helmets. And then with the family fun group, we approach that as, maybe new family riders, family boaters who, after COVID picked up a new boat, bought ATVs because they look really fun, and got a cabin, and they may not be aware of where to go for looking for safety classes, where to go for regulations. It hasn't been something that they're doing in their families that they grew up doing. They didn't grow up on the water, they didn't grow up boating. And they may be operating kind of under the guise of, we got this for fun. So we're approaching it in like a really fun way. So really messaging more simple, basic safety measures to that kind of group, like making sure you're wearing your life jacket. It's required for kids under 10 years old. So including those things that maybe more seasoned riders and boaters are aware of. So just messaging those in two different ways and understanding that they may take in that information a little bit differently. And the heart of that campaign was a series of powerful and engaging public service announcements that highlighted kind of the factors that we already talked about: wearing the life jacket, riding sober, boating sober, using your safety gear, your helmets, your seat belts, and then kind of blasted those messages on everywhere that we could. Strategically place them on YouTube and social media. So we had our digital platforms, and then also getting them in front of riders and boaters, and again, very strategic places: bars and restaurants, gas stations, the gas station TVs, where we know that it was going to be a point of decision making as they're heading to the lake, as they're going out on the trail, and they're in the face with that safety advertising before they hopefully catch that safety message before there's that point of decision making where a bad decision might be made. So we've got a couple years left with kind of that campaign that we're working on. And we had a really great boating season last summer, and we had our lowest fatality rates that we've seen in the history since we've been keeping statistics on boating fatalities. And of course, one is always too many, but it's really been nice. And same with ATV use. We've had it was the lowest fatalities we've seen in 4 or 5 years. So those numbers going down is, of course, the goal for all of this.
Thank you. And Jake.
Yeah, in Wisconsin, it's a lot of the similar things. I mean, we're working with our partners. I wanted to shout out to the Wisconsin ATV Association, to the Association of Wisconsin Snowmobile Clubs. We've found that when you work with groups that are very passionate about their sport, and groups that really want to engage new users, they want to have new recruitment, they want to get more people out there enjoying the outdoors. Those folks, of course, they want us to all be doing it as safely as possible. And often just partnering with them on things and running things by them can really help our safety messaging. We've also tried to tailor our messaging by looking at the demographics maybe that are coming out of our statistics. So if we look at our past year's fatalities or injuries, we'll look at, okay, is there a certain age group maybe that we should be focusing on? In Wisconsin, it seems like a lot of our 40s, 50s, 60-year-old people actually are the majority of people that are getting seriously hurt or killed. Is that maybe because they're basically aged out? They're in a bracket where they are not required to take a safety course. That's something that we've looked at. And that's very high possibility. One of the other things we did just this last year is we partnered with the Ride Safe Foundation. It was a really cool opportunity. Kristen Almer basically started this foundation as a result of her young nephew being tragically killed in an ATV crash in northern Wisconsin. And she's been involved for, I think, the majority of her life in the power sports industry. So racing, things like that, basically professional power sports athletes. And so she created a unique program where she would bring in some of these famous names. If anybody follows, dirt bike racing or snowmobile racing or anything like that, she'd bring these names in to schools. And there were several schools in northern Wisconsin where she brought these folks in, and there were some of our staff there as well. And we just had that message of riding safe, wearing a helmet, mentoring with an adult, a responsible adult, an experienced adult before you get out on one of these machines. Don't let kids have the keys or access to keys on one of these machines if it's not safe for them to operate one. So that was just a really cool effort. From what I understand, Wisconsin and Minnesota were kind of the first area that they did this last year. And so the hope is that that's going to be spreading nationwide as well. So I think that's a really cool effort. That's obviously focused on kids, and which is super important. Obviously, we want our children that are growing up and our new user groups to really be that safest generation, right? Reach them while they're young. So that's just some of the things that we've done.
And some of you mentioned this with the things you just shared, but are there any other key messages that you guys use, communicate, and encourage recreation vehicle drivers to drive safe in their area that you would like to share and highlight since we're all together here?
I think the two primary messages that we put out as an agency related to boat and snow operation are wearing a life jacket and a helmet, whether depending on the activity, and then operating sober. And I think those are the two primary that a lot of the states here push out, just in a sense, as we've talked about already a lot. In most cases, the majority of the accidents happening on the landscape are those are some of the top contributing factors, especially to fatalities.
Susan.
Yeah, the classic, we still use the classic message. And also, as Hunter mentioned, wear it floats, you don't, in order to let people know that, the life jacket is the floating mechanism, no matter how well you can swim.
And Tony.
Yeah, I think, several approaches that the other folks already mentioned, but two different things. We have a great partnership with Snowmobile North Dakota. They're the proponent for snowmobiling here in the state, and they do a lot of our trail grooming with an army of volunteers and different things. But they invite us to some of their key yearly meetings, and they support us in that outreach for safety. So they have some safety messaging they do on our behalf, both in that in-person meetings and then through their social media. And then another thing that we try to do is, where do most people go? To the dealers. So that's typically your first port of contact if you're going to be new into these sports, or that's where you go for your services, or some people just like to hang out there. So just really working with the dealers to get some of our brochures into their dealerships, where people can access those brochures.
We'll just keep going through our questions. What is the biggest barrier to promote recreation vehicle safety? Tony, and then Jake.
Yeah, sorry. I think it's three. It's cost, it's access, and then it's culture. I think those are three of the barriers that we kind of see with this. And so cost. What we've kind of realized is that there's a cost associated with some of these safety courses, and there's cost with some of the safety equipment as well. So what we've done for the last year or so is offer our OHV safety courses at no cost, and also provide them a DOT certified helmet. Because we did see in some of our original safety courses, the kids would show up with helmets that are clearly damaged, have been dropped, and no longer can provide you that protection. And then access. How do we get out into the multiple points where people are riding this to promote not only safety, but some of the enforcement, and then again, is that continued partnership with our law enforcement professionals and assisting them with equipment and some of the overtime pay to get their officers out into our riding areas into the state where we just can't, as the proponent for the OHV and snowmobile safety, we just can't be in those places with the team of two that we have and with our other duties. And I think that enforcement and those safety things is helping to improve the culture here in North Dakota with the focus on safety and sober riding in here. I think one thing that a lot of folks don't understand, and most states are participants in the Recreational Trails Program grant, and there's two proponents that the state can access some funds in there. One is for administration to run the grant, but the other thing is that it's for safety and trail related safety stuff. So we use those funds from the Federal Highways Administration to help pay for some of that, both that enforcement, and we don't call it enforcement with RTP, we call it trail presence. But to promote that trail safety, we use that to purchase some of those helmets as well too. So most states have some of those funds, and it's just how do you interpret the regulation, and then how do you apply those funds and back into some of the safety focus on our trails.
Jake.
Yeah, I guess I kind of got to echo Tony when I first read this question a while back when they were presented to us. Culture was kind of the number one thing that came up as a barrier. So in Wisconsin, I mean, we're a hotbed for multiple types of recreational vehicle use. And I think there's just kind of this culture that, hey, I'm just out having fun. I'm just out recreating. I'm not necessarily driving a car or a truck on a roadway. But the thing is you can't even really use that as an excuse, because in Wisconsin we have multiple snowmobile road routes or ATV and UTV road routes. So these vehicles do have access to the roadways like any other motor vehicle in a variety of counties in the state. So it just is kind of this cultural shift. We also have frankly alcohol laws that are not as strong as other states surrounding us. Wisconsin has some laws that frustrate our law enforcement at times when it comes to alcohol violations and alcohol use. But it is what it is. We work with what we have. So that's really been one of our challenges, is just trying to convince people that, hey, yes, have fun, enjoy the sport, but you really have to do this responsibly. You have to do this ethically. And think about the other people that are out there, not just yourself. Think about your family members, think about your friends, the people that you may leave behind if you make a very bad decision, or vice versa, the family that you may cause great grief to if you make a very bad decision, on the opposite end, somebody that's a complete stranger that you don't know. So we've tried to, and that loops back a little bit to the last question, just kind of some of our safety messaging. But I know when I do an interview, a media interview of some type, I try to throw some of that in there at times, just to try to remind people that, hey, what you do doesn't just affect you, it affects a bunch of other people. So I guess pull at the heartstrings, so to speak, and just try to get people to think about what they're doing and be responsible about it. And yeah, cost can be an issue as well in Wisconsin. I mean, we have a budget. We have only so much money that we can spend on safety campaign messages. But we do lean on, one of the things we do have is we have a grant program where ADBSC and which is the Wisconsin Snowmobile Clubs and the Wisconsin ATV clubs, they really lobbied to get more funding for our county rec patrols. So there's only so many wardens in Wisconsin, and there's only so much area that we can cover. And so what's been really cool is we can send that funding to our law enforcement partners and work with them you know, and try to address some of that cost issue where wardens just not even just cost, it's manpower. We can't necessarily get everywhere and be everywhere. So so that's been a really cool program. There's literally millions of dollars that can get distributed statewide to these other programs. So that's a really cool thing that Wisconsin's able to do.
And I think, oh, Erin, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, one thing that we've talked about too is the fact that so many, which is why we started this multi-state collaboration, is that a lot of times you're also having people coming from other states. Like, you know, Wisconsin is kind of like a hotbed of fun, you know, so a lot of people come from Illinois, they come from Iowa, they come from Minnesota. They're traveling between states and they don't always know all the laws for every state. So I think a lot of times there's someone's coming up for a couple of days. I'm not going to bother to learn what the specific laws are there. So I think that is part of, maybe, I don't know if that would be culture or just education too, is that we're not always recreating in the state we live in.
Lisa, Susan, did either of you want to share on this question?
I had some notes on it, but Jake and Tony hit basically the same things that I had noted. That really the biggest barriers that we come across is changing the mindset, changing the culture of safety around, you know, not treating ATVs as toys, and just addressing those barriers. You know, how do we address that? Targeted education, law enforcement, like we already talked about, and of course, partnering with our user groups. Like in Minnesota, we have some really dedicated user groups, our ATV Minnesota group, which is all of our OHV riders, and our Min USA group, which is our snowmobile riders. So, you know, using the same safety messaging that we use, but it's not coming from a government entity. It's coming from fellow riders. It's coming from their you know, their groups that they're able to join, their buddies that they're able to go out with, and promoting it that way too. So it's straight from the people who are out on the trail with them.
And Susan.
And then Veronica, the same. My answer was already taken care of by the other group, so thank you.
Wonderful. Due to time, I think I'm going to skip the next question just to allow time for everyone to answer the questions following that. So we'll go to our next one, which is, have you used any evaluation techniques to see if your campaigns are changing behavior? Tony.
So two things we do. One is with our partner organizations, when we post some of our safety courses, we ask them to do a survey just based on just some safety questions. If they realized some of the things that we propose in the class, you know, were they doing those behaviors before that, and do they think that now they'll change those behaviors? And also skill sets. Are they more comfortable operating now after the class or before the class? We ask them to do some of those surveys for us, and we do see that people didn't think the helmets were that important, and post class they do, and then the skills as well. So, and we've seen that too as we track fatalities. So, 2020 we had 8 fatalities. 2021, when we started getting more into the communities, we saw the fatalities drop to 6. 2022, we saw a drop to 4 as we brought in the helmets. And then in 2023, we saw 0 fatalities for OHV or snowmobile. So that's kind of our measuring stick, because that's the worst thing that's going to happen. And we do see a decrease in some of our accidents and injuries that law enforcement have to respond to as well. So both from a survey standpoint and then tracking some of the statistics that we get.
Any other evaluation techniques anyone would like to share? All right, we have plenty of questions, plenty to discuss. So our next one is, how has substance impairment affected the number of crashes of recreational vehicles in your area? Tony.
Yeah. So, so I did a little digging into our statistics here, and kind of like what Jake said. Our average age for substance abuse citations on motorized recreational vehicles is 40. 90% of those are male. And then what we did see is every DUI or SUI or substance abuse citation was because an officer responded to an accident. So those you can make that correlation that substance abuse or operating under the influence is really the cause of that accident. So almost 25% of our reported accidents were substance abuse, that was involved in, or in driving impaired was involved in those accidents.
Jake.
Yeah, I guess very similar. I mean, that's I think there was a sub question to that one as well, is about, cannabis being legalized. Obviously, that's not legal in Wisconsin at this point. So our number one factor, if you're looking at a drug, it would be alcohol. And just some statistics is around just over 50% of fatal ATV and UTV crashes had alcohol on board, and around 67% of our fatal snowmobile crashes had alcohol on board. So obviously that's a clue, right? And then if we look at those numbers where we actually were able to get, blood results for somebody that was involved in a crash, the alcohol isn't just a little bit. I mean, this is usually well over the legal limit. So what we're seeing is that it's not the person that has one beer that's crashing. It's the people that are really having a number of drinks and really exceeding where they should be at. Those are the folks that are in general involved in these crashes. So yeah, it definitely increases our crashes. I'm convinced that if we didn't have any intoxicated operation, we would be in the single digits for sure. We might even have a year of 0 fatalities, if we could do that. So
Hunter.
Yeah, and I think Illinois is similar to Wisconsin and North Dakota in the fact that some of the statistics related to operating under the influence in the 40s, male typically, but in regard to recreational cannabis, and that became legal in Illinois in 2020. Statistically speaking, we haven't seen an increase in boat accidents or snowmobile accidents directly related to that. I know we have had a few boating accidents where passengers that were under the influence of cannabis or other illegal drugs, jumping overboard, drowning in instances of that. But as far as the operator goes, I don't think we have any data to support that there's been an increase. But again, it's been only a few years. So.
All right, thank you. So next I want to ask a question which has brought all of us together is, why is a partnership like this multi-state venture key to ensuring a safe experience for recreation safe explorers? So why is this partnership that we have important? How has it been key? If you guys could share a little bit about your experience. Jake.
I think probably the two main things that stick out to me is, one, we're stronger if we work together, right? When we work together and see what other states are doing, especially surrounding states, maybe they're doing something that I hadn't thought of, or that, the Wisconsin DNR hadn't come up with before. So I think that's the number one reason. Number two is that, and I think it was brought up earlier, we share a lot of the same user groups. So our folks are going to Minnesota or Illinois and vice versa. You know, a lot of all of us as surrounding states, we have folks that are coming and going and traveling between these states. And I think that if we have similar safety messages, or at least a focus on that safety message, maybe they don't get it in Wisconsin, but they get it in North Dakota or Minnesota or Iowa. So I think that's a real advantage to do, you know, to these partnerships.
Susan.
Yeah, so for us, of course, the partnership is like a force multiplier. So instead of just Iowa working by themselves with limited resources, we're able to work together, similar to what Jake said. And you know, we are now have swung that, knowing that collaboration is where we're reaching the masses, instead of everybody just being in their own silos and doing their own thing.
Lisa.
So I broke this one down a little bit into a couple different areas. The unified voice, which I think everyone's kind of talked about here. Just being able to hear it from not just government entities across state lines, but also user groups, changing how people are approaching it, how they're approaching safety, that it's just what they do, that there's not a, you know, if you're going to take out the ATV, you put on your helmet, and that they're hearing it from every direction they come at, when either if they're new to riding or if they've been doing it for a long time. Cross-border coordination, which Jake hit on really well, that they're, you know, we share users, they're going across state lines, and minimizing confusion for them so that, you know, they're able to know where to go to find regulations that may be different between like Minnesota and Wisconsin. It's really helpful, especially for me doing outreach, is the increased resources. So what we've worked on with Aaron and Veronica, that they were able to create these, you know, great rack flyers that we didn't have before. And now we're able to use them as resources to give them out when we're out doing education and talking to the public. And then of course, sharing best practices, so that we're all on the same page with what the best practices are. And I think we heard that when we're talking about all the factors, that contributing factors to the incidents and fatalities that we're seeing. And, you know, we can't do it on our own. So these partnerships have been just so great force multipliers for everything we're doing.
Absolutely. And Aaron.
I would say we would not be doing anything without our partners. You know, between Susan paving the way for us to be at the Lake Okoboji Winter Games, to Jake starting this whole thing, to Linda putting this thing together. I mean, we really are so grateful for everyone that we've been working with. Everyone has brought good ideas and energy and context. Jake introduces me to people and I follow up immediately. You know, everybody's doing something, and it's really great too, because I didn't know. I'm learning all the time. You know, within the DNR, there's the boating people, and then you know there's the ATV and the snowmobile people, and they work together, and then with their departments. But again, it's all of us doing it together, and we just all have the number one goal is that no one gets hurt, and you know, that's all we want, is just that no one gets hurt. It's been really nice to partner with like-minded people. You know, and Veronica and I have partnered together, which we probably wouldn't have. And that's been really great because we share ideas about other things that help both of our regions. So I couldn't be more grateful for this partnership.
Well, what we'll do now, because we have a lot of good questions in the Q&A, so I would like to transition to that portion of the webinar and take a look at some of those questions. Give us one moment. All right. We are going to officially transition, and Aaron, if you can help me with some of the questions, fielding some of those, and we'll ask those to the group.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question is from Rita. Rita asks, do any of the speakers partner with Specialty Vehicle Institute of America? So I am guessing based on the quietness, nobody does.
Yep, this is Tony from North Dakota. So we use a lot of. They have a great website that has a lot of key messaging that we've incorporated into our programs, and then also with the ATV Safety Institute for our instructor certification. So we understood how to properly deliver our youth education.
Thanks, Tony.
And
Go ahead.
I'll add two here for the evaluation that just popped up on the screen. While we're going through the questions, everyone can take a minute to fill out the evaluation survey, and then a link to the evaluation survey can also be found in the chat box, or you can follow the QR code that is on the screen.
So Lauren asks, and this is a great question, I'm curious about this too. Do you think people who take the classes online have less of an impact in their learning than those who take in person? MAD offers our victim impact panels for DUI, OWI offenders online and in person. And our online classes are amazing, but we do feel the in-person has a better impact. So curious to hear what you guys think about that.
This is Tony again.
Oh, Tony?
Yep. So 100%. So as part of, again, we follow the ATV Safety Institute, and portion of that is an online certification online course that you do prior to the hands-on. There's also, we can't be everywhere every time, and so there's a online course that gives you your safety certification that we have a third-party organization run this online course, and the kids have taken that in years past and then have now followed the ATV safety one, and it's hands down the in-person is so much better because you have that immediate feedback to some of the riding type of skills that you can correct on the spot, where they would have never had that just from that watching a video online. So if that made any sense.
Yeah, definitely. Does anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I agree. I think in-person classes are better. I think especially when you're reaching younger kids, younger age group. I think the interaction is better when they're actually talking to people, learning things with their peers. One thing that is unique to Wisconsin is we do not have, I guess, what you would call a hands-on or operational training program. We do encourage students to, once they go through the Wisconsin ATV or snowmobile or, a boating class, to mentor with somebody that is experienced and knows what they're doing. Or yeah, absolutely, the ASI or the ATV Safety Institute or the ROVA class on the side of the UTVs are excellent classes, but those are something that would be in addition to what the state requires. So at least at this point, but yeah, so I think it's very, very good. I mean, I always encourage folks to go in person if they can. So,
and those additional classes, of course, go into the additional costs that we were talking about earlier.
It does. Yep.
And so I'm skipping around a little bit. Lauren asks, do you have a centralized database for incidents? Is it separate for boats versus land-based? So I think the answer to that is no, there is not a centralized database for incidents across the whole country. If maybe Lisa, Susan, or Hunter, you haven't answered a question in a while. I'll put you on the Hotdish hot seat. Do you have an answer for that?
I'm not aware of a centralized nationwide database for recreational vehicle accidents. I know Illinois, for example, publishes that information out to the public on our website specifically for Illinois, and I know some surrounding states do as well, but I'm not aware of a national database. No.
I think one thing that just recently I had mentioned, the Ride Safe Foundation, if you go to their website, they, I think, are starting to compile different state records from around the country. But what they've ran into is that some states keep very, very poor records. I think kind of in our area in the Midwest, we actually have some pretty good records from what I understand, as far as injuries and fatalities, but there's a number of states throughout the country that do not track them the same way that we do. So those numbers would be very tough to get. But if you know, on the Wisconsin side, we do keep pretty good records. We have an annual report that comes out every April. So sometime this month, if all things go as planned, we'll have our 2023 annual report, which covers everything from boating, ATV, snowmobile, all different statistics, how many kids passed safety class, or how many people went to safety classes, all kinds of numbers. So that can be kind of an interesting read if the questioner is interested in looking at that.
And in the chat, Linda just posted the link to the Ride Safe Foundation. I see, I'm gonna kind of put two questions together because we're running short on time. David wants to make sure everybody knows that there's a great collaboration between Minnesota and Wisconsin for the ATV clubs, holding hands on safety classes and certifications. And they've given students free helmets. ATV Minnesota, representing 70 clubs, has a new safety committee that is going to community events promoting safety and fitting kids and parents with helmets. Thank you, Dave, for doing that. And Carly asks, how are other agencies recruiting participants to attend education sessions or events? So I think David kind of answered Carly's question. And you guys mentioned earlier, it's just getting those relationships going with the snowmobile clubs, the ATV clubs, and you know, I'm thinking the university level and stuff, but does anyone have a specific example of tabling events that have been really effective or partnerships?
Again, this is Tony. Just that outreach with the dealers. So we have found most dealers will advertise those courses. Some even want to host a course, and then we'll come to their dealership and host and do a course on their behalf. And then I believe that everyone that purchases a new OHV or UTV, they get a message informing them about a course from the ATV Safety Institute and stuff like that as well. So,
oh, that's awesome. Well, Craig asks how to reach ATV dealers to build in strong safety messages. I think Tony, you just answered that question. And it's just contacting them and starting a partnership, right?
that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. There are so many questions left, you guys. This is amazing. Does anybody see a question that still hasn't been answered that appeals to them in the Q&A? Because I don't know that we're gonna be able to get to all of them.
And we have until 11:15, so we still
Oh,
have.
okay.
We
All
have some
right.
time.
Okay. Amanda asks, other than changing the laws around the age of people needing safety certificates, and that's based on what Jake said about the older population not needing them, how might we be able to incentivize or convince adults to complete a safety certification course, even if it's not legally required of them?
I can jump in here and share my perspective on this. Is a lot of our recreational users, boat, snow, ATV, their parents, right? Their kids are coming up, their kids are going to need to meet that education requirement in most states. So I think we always encourage, especially with our in-person classes, adults stick around, stay during the class, get certified. Whether it be snowmobile, boat, these youth coming through the class are going to need parents to make purchases, to have safety equipment, to go operate. to get there. There's a lot of things that they're not able to do. So I think having a parent with them in the class, they can learn together. Adults are always saying they never knew that, they never knew this. So we always encourage parents to stay in the class, and that's one organic means of reaching some of those adults that don't necessarily meet that requirement, but could benefit from it. So not necessarily an incentive, but a easier pathway in.
Thanks, Hunter.
I can,
Yeah, go for it, Lisa.
I was just going to share with the kind of tying in these last two, the marine, some of the marine dealers around the metro area here started doing videos for parents who were purchasing wake boats, because that was a big concern. So having the adults who are going to be making the purchases, not just, the kids who they're handing the keys off to, but the parents who are making the purchases for PWCs, wake boats. And it would be great to get it into ATV retailers as well, sitting down and watching safety videos before they can make these purchases, because they're on board for safety, because this is their group who's going to be, they want their user groups to be coming back, being safe on the water, being safe on the trails, and coming back and making more purchases. So the work that I've done with some of the retailers around here it's been very positive, that they do want as much safety information as they can get in front of the adults too. Because it is really hard without law changes. It's really hard to reach those groups who it's not mandatory for them to take those safety classes.
That's really great to hear, Lisa. Chris is part of the ATV Minnesota Safety Committee, and first wants to give a shout out to Towards Zero Deaths, which is amazing. Asks, is there an impact speaker whose message is related specifically to an ATV or UTV crash? So interestingly, Chris, we have contact with a snowmobile crash, we have contact with boating crash. I don't believe right now, I think we've been trying to find someone involved in an ATV crash who would like to speak out about it. I think we're still working on that. If someone knows somebody and wants to point them in our direction, I think we'd be really grateful for that. But right now we do not have someone. MAD does not.
I did have a comment, Aaron, for Craig. I think he had a couple of questions for road routes. One involved youths operating on a roadway, and then the other one was just the increased safety issues for higher center of gravity on roadways. So one thing that we did actually kind of unique this winter is unfortunately we had a very poor snow season. We basically had a lot of areas in the state where our snowmobile trails didn't open up, and so what we saw folks kind of shifting over to the ATV UTV side and operating on road routes, because the majority of our off-road trails are closed during the winter to ATV and UTV operations. So what they were doing is they wanted to get out and get some fresh air, and so they're operating on roadways. So we kind of had to just tailor our safety messaging or our PSAs, so to speak, to the season. So we had a winter with a lack of snow. We actually had a bad UTV crash that involved slippery road conditions, on a curve. So very similar to a motor vehicle crash, but we had to tailor some of our messaging to the fact that, hey, these machines, many of them have low pressure tires. They have a higher center of gravity, like Craig says. They don't handle the same way on pavement as they do on gravel or, a sand or dirt trail. And so we tried to kind of tailor that just to fit the season and fit, maybe a unique changing trend that we were seeing this last winter. And then in the case of kids or underage operation, that's something that we covered in our safety classes. It's really just trying to work through our partners. Farm Tech Days is a big event that's going to be happening. It's happened a couple times here now in Wisconsin. So we will have, a table set up there to promote ATV safety, because you're going to get a lot of kids through there that maybe don't recreationally drive an ATV, but maybe they use it on a farm or behind the house. Maybe they're not even necessarily going on a roadway. So that's kind of that unreached user group that we want to try to touch, just with some of those additional programs or events that we can attend. So that's one way that we've done that. But yeah, it's a challenge. I'll say it's tough because sometimes, you know, if a child has access to a machine and their folks aren't watching and they decide, hey, I want to take this up and across the highway or run it down the road, sometimes that can be hard to stop. But we're definitely tracking that way.
Thanks, Jake. Rita wants to know if, because we've talked about ATVs, UTVs, boating, and snowmobiles. Are any of the agencies including off-road motorcycles, powered two-wheelers, as part of recreation vehicles?
I know, so we did a really a large video shoot a couple years ago, and it was with our ATV Minnesota group, and that included our OHM group, the off-highway motorcycles, because it's really important to get the representation of all the user groups. And it was really nice because they're, you know, users who have the gear, the equipment, updated registrations, all the things. So then they're in front of the cameras, and we're able to like pull for our safety messaging, pull from those video shoots if we need, you know, a specific message for the motorcycle user groups, to get that there. And they've been great to work with again. So yeah, that representation I think is very important. So I appreciate the, you know, question pointing that out.
Well, and that ties directly into two questions we had in the question thing about PSAs. What are we doing as far as television PSAs, radio PSAs, billboards, posters, signs? How are, I guess we have two questions of how are we marketing this? So I will be very transparent about MAD. We don't have a huge budget for marketing recreation vehicle. We are working to build a when we did the BUI, so the boating under the influence thing prior to this, there were some videos made, and I think Linda put those on the website. So those exist and they feature Alex Oddie, who I mentioned earlier. But you know, we're going to be working on some radio PSAs, but those are going to be by the grace of the radio stations who will put them up for free. And then maybe some of you want to talk about some of the marketing that you've done. Lisa mentioned the video shoot she did, but maybe some of you have other things to talk about.
I just want to also add that anything that we create is open for anybody to take and use. So we do have, you know, billboard photos and graphics that are all, you know, all of the creative is already done for it. So that's the great thing with these collaborations is that you don't have to start over. You don't have to have your own video shoot. You can use the materials that are already there. So, you know, if there's anything specific that you're looking for, please use what we've already created.
That's great. Anyone else have anything to note? Veronica, can I throw it back to you?
Yes, absolutely. If you guys scroll over to the chat, you will see that Linda is adding our contact information there. So if you would like to follow up with any of us, connect with us after today, we'd be happy to connect with you guys. But we're going to go ahead and move on to next steps. So our next traffic safety hot dish is scheduled for Wednesday, July 17th, 2024 at 10 a.m. Central Time. And the topic is yet to be determined, but we hope you can join us in July too. A special thank you to all of our speakers today. Thank you to you, our viewers. We hope you learned something new and will share your knowledge with your colleagues. We encourage you to follow the Minnesota TZD program on social media, including Twitter and Facebook, and watch for the latest news on our TZD website, minnesotatzd.org. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.